trying to figure out where those flags should be. We're very conscious that a lot of different flags exist already out there in a lot of different legal regimes. So it's quite hard for charities to navigate that space, actually to figure out where they should be swimming so they're not smashing into the rocks. And fortunately today we have a fantastic lineup of people who are hopefully going to be able to shed some light on the issue of how we can improve charities' governance. So we have Chris Kelly, who will give us a legal perspective, particularly on what changes to the Trustee Act mean for trustees of charities, and a little bit about charities, the older population charities, and what that means for the future. Then Karan Rangi, who's a governance specialist and previously a member of the Charities Registration Board, will be looking at the broad issues of what does fit-for-purpose governance look like in the wider community governance sector, and what mechanisms can support good governance. Then Sarah Doherty, trustee of the New Zealand Navigator Trust and director at Doherty Solutions Limited, will be exploring governance from the grassroots charity perspective, particularly using the learnings of New Zealand Navigator, the system set up for charities to self-assess their governance over a number of years. Then Tina Wilson from New Zealand Trade Enterprise will talk about the particular issues and challenges for governance of Maori organisations. And finally, Dr. Rosemary Langford from the University of Melbourne will give her perspective on how governance standards have worked in an Australian context. And then we'll have opportunities for questions, hopefully, if everyone's just time. So, without further ado, I will like to introduce Chris to kick us off.
Thank you, Andrew. And I don't have to go to the mic, do I? Stand here. Yes, sorry. So, normally I have slides, but I haven't got any slides today. I feel quite bereft, but hope you'll cope anyway. So, as Andrew said, two things I want to touch on briefly. One is legislative change, and the other is to do with the ageing population and what that might mean for charities. So, the legislation I want to talk about is the Trust Bill. We've heard about other legislative changes in the wind. But the Trust Bill is actually in front of Parliament right now, so it's going to happen. It's had a long, long gestation. I can remember agitating for reform in the 90s, would you believe? But the bill is there. It will come into force in the not too distant future. It doesn't affect, of course, all charities, but it does affect those charities that are trusts, which is quite a lot of charities. Certainly the ones I act for and work with. So as I said, the bill has a long lead-in time, so it's probably about 2 years before it's going to be in force, but it will make some changes for trustees of trusts, including charitable trusts. One of the big things the bill does is, for the first time ever, trustees' standard duties will be actually set out in black and white so you can look at them. Up till now, it's textbooks like the one I wrote, which sort of discuss what the duties are in a discursive sort of way and refer to some cases here and there. Now we'll actually have them in black and white, and you can refer to them. So that's going to be quite helpful. As always, most of those duties are things which apply by default unless you say something different in your trust deed. So the answer to all questions related to trust is always, what does the trust deed say? So that's where you go first. One of the trustees' standard obligations, which has always applied to trustees, was the rule that trustees have to be unanimous. Before you panic, yes, there was an exemption for charitable trusts. There has long been an exemption for charitable trusts. Charities are allowed to make majority decisions. In the new bill, it just restates the unanimity rule and doesn't mention the charity exemption. So I have a slight concern that exemption might have actually got lost. I'm not sure whether that's deliberate or not, but it doesn't seem to be mentioned in the bill. What I do recommend to those charities that are trusts, go and look at the trust deed. Usually, most of the deeds will say the trustees of this charity can make majority decisions. You'll usually have a clause there about the quorum required for meetings and how many must vote in favour of the proposition and so on. That's good if you've got it. If you haven't, you may need to think again, because up till now you're able to make majority decisions. In future it may not be possible. I would recommend looking at whether you can change the deed. There may be a variation power. Some other big changes in the bill. The trustees' powers are set out in quite wide terms now. Most trust deeds will already have a clause saying the trustees can do just about everything that a human being could do. That's more or less what the bill now says as well. You may not want that in your charity, of course. You may decide that your charity should have limited powers. That may have been the intention all along. If so, you may need to change the terms of your trust deed. There are other new rules that are passing interest. There's new powers to appoint and remove trustees, where there's an impasse or an inability to get rid of someone who's perhaps no longer competent to act as a trustee and so on. That will help in some cases. There's the ability to delegate your powers as trustee if you're overseas. That's always been there, but it's improved. And there are also some new rules about clauses. I don't know how many charities have this, but I think quite a few do, where the clause that says the trustees are not to be held liable for anything that goes wrong, provided they acted reasonably, honestly, didn't deliberately do something that they knew was wrong. The Act now limits the extent of those clauses and says you can only be let off as trustee if there's no evidence of dishonesty, willful conduct, or gross negligence. So, slightly higher standard probably for trustees in future. Finally, it may only be occasionally relevant, but for some of you, but there's also alternative dispute resolution processes in the Act. So you can actually use mediation if you've got an impasse within a trust. So those only affect trustees, but I think they're quite useful to know that they're coming up. I think in particular, if you're feeling hamstrung by lack of powers in your deed, in the future you may have a lot more power. But you do need to think about whether you need to still be able to make majority decisions rather than being stuck with unanimous ones. Now, the other thing that I've noticed over my many years as a trust practitioner is the problems increasingly caused by an ageing population. And certainly with private trusts, we've noticed quite often people hang on too long. It's too late to retire because they haven't got the mental capacity to sign the documents anymore. And it's very complicated. There's been a heap of cases in front of the courts where trustees had to be removed because they were no longer mentally competent. Now, I haven't seen it yet in the charitable trust sector too much, but I am starting to get conscious of the tendency for some charities, particularly smaller ones, I think, to be run by local community volunteers, often retired people who've got the time. And the problem I am concerned about is, have we got a succession plan going here? I've in previous Law Society conferences on elder law where I've spoken, I've talked about a grey tsunami of ageing New Zealanders. I feel qualified to talk about a grey tsunami. But there is, you know, we are ageing, we are living a lot longer, people are trying to be active a lot longer, and that's great. But people, trustees and others on committees of charities need to be aware of the need to move on, to bring in new blood regularly. In some organisations there are of course rules that say you have to stand down after a few years. The problem I've seen is that it's all very well you're ready to stand down, but there's no one to replace you, no one wants the job, particularly if you happen to be the Secretary or the Treasurer. Because Secretaries and Treasurers, no one wants those jobs. I know, I've been one. So, you know, you need to think about that succession planning. Are we, you know, in the case of incorporated societies and organisations like where you've got a membership base, and some trusts have memberships as well, is your membership active? I've had cases where the membership just sort of shrinks and shrinks, and you have difficulty getting a quorum at meetings, and it's very easy for a group to take over and misuse a charity. So, and that has happened on occasions. So I do sound a word of warning. Have you got plans in place to make sure your charity is active, new members are being recruited? In the case of trustees, what is your trustee replacement process? Some of the bigger ones I've seen have almost an HR committee that sort of goes out and headhunts potential new trustees and brings them in. I think that's a very good process if you're big enough to manage it. So that's just my thought about future governance, making sure you've got new blood coming in all the time.
And I wanted to start by saying that one of the unkept audience, I'm just going to get someone to lock the doors for the next but secondly, my views and thoughts on governance in the sector are very much shaped by my current experiences as governor on 2 charities, 2 Crown entities, of which this is one of them, and a couple of international boards. And so I just wanted to check in the room who here is a governor of charity. Yeah, so a good chunk. So of the rest of you, who's a governor in a commercial organisation? Oh, a few of those. And so the rest of you must be friends of ours. That's really good. So I've got 2 areas of thinking I wanted to float with you. And the first one is around the challenges for strengthening governance in the charities or the not-for-profit or the community governance sector is probably the best way to describe it. So who here thinks that governance in our sector is strong? Whoa. Okay. So who thinks it's absolutely? Awesome. Strong. Thank you. What about at the other end? Okay. So absolutely terrible. So if there was a 5 and that was the 1, all the rest of you are 3.
2.5.
Yeah? Okay. So my first lot of thoughts was around the context in which we all have an interest in seeing governance get stronger in our sector. And part of that context are the views generally on governance in this country. So I just wanted to pass some ideas by you. These are based on comments and thoughts I hear from people in governance space. So the first thing is there's a hierarchy to governance in this country. So business is king. So if you're on a corporate board, that's real governance, doing governance properly. And then there's a big leap sort of downwards to not-for-profit boards that are paid. And then there's an even bigger leap down to not-for-profit or charity boards where you're not paid. And then right at the bottom, because this is the place where they tell you to go and practice governance, school boards and trustees, because after all, it's only the education of our kids, what's the matter? So I hear this expressed quite often, and I think that is one of the challenges as to why it is difficult to get good governance in our sector. Now, it's not to say that we don't have good people. I've got awesome colleagues on the boards that I serve on. But I do think that a second factor around this are some of the perceptions around governance generally. So here's the first one. It's easy. The staff do the work, governments just go to meetings and eat their lunch and go home. The second one is that it's an end-of-life occupation. So you do it after you've done everything else, right? So you've got something to bring. And there's a certain amount of rational thinking in there. But there's also the implication that you can only be a governor if you're old. And I don't subscribe to that at all, even though I'm old. The third thing, and it gets to the hierarchy, that somehow not-for-profit governance is not as valuable as other governance, particularly if it's paid. And fourthly, and this is a bit of a variation on the theme of it being easy, is that, it's really hard work when you're a governor on a commercial board because you've got those targets to meet. Well, I must say there are days when someone is sitting on the board of Te Papa, there are days when it would be great just to have one target of making some money and not trying to address a range of complex issues for a very wide audience. So I've got some different views of that. So I think that does have a bearing on the way that people, both inside our sector and outside the sector, perceive the importance of governance. And I think too the fact that it's largely learned on the job. So who learned about governance when they were at school? You know what I mean? And I would say most of us learned by just getting on the end, probably mostly by doing stuff wrong. Those were the best learners. So again, I think there's a bit of work to be done both inside our sector and outside to work on how we value governance. So what kind of things, my second lot of ideas was what can we do to support getting governance better? And so the first thing I think there's got to be an attitudinal change towards the value of governance. And I think that change again has got to come from both inside and outside. But I think too that developing more purposeful support to getting governance better is really important. So we're really lucky in this country that we have got some great resources like NZ Navigator that Sarah's going to talk about. But one of my observations is that a lot of the resources are concentrating on the technical skills of being a governor, so how to read a government sheet, things like how to do a risk register. And there is very little support around the bit I think that makes the most difference, which is the behavioural skills that you need to make a board. You know, how do you play nicely with your mates? How do you bring diverse views together towards the common purpose of the organisation? It's a lot harder to find that support. And I'd say most cases where boards have, where things have gone to custard, has been when relationships have broken down. So I think a focus on support for building strong behavioural skills is one way that we can get strong boards. I think too, looking at some of the changes that we might need in governance practices, so some of these things that have been long-standing hallmarks. So I hear people talk about the importance of consensus decision making. I would suggest to you that if we're really going to make the most of having diverse views at the table, then perhaps our focus should not be on consensus, but it should be on what are the range of options that we've got open to us in order to be successful as organisations. And finally, I think, and this is responsibility for all of us, that we need to be making space for new and different models of governance to be developed. So, at the age of, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but old, you know, I don't for 1 minute think if I was a 21-year-old starting out a governance career now, then I would necessarily design the processes that we have. So I think there's good reasons for some of the governance practices that we have. But we've got room to actually let people grow and find practices that work for them and work for these generations. And that's all there is to it. Thank you.
And now I'll welcome Sarah Doherty to the stage.
Andrew. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui o te rā. I'd just like to say NZ Navigator is not a magic bullet, so I'm going to talk to you about it, but it's one of many solutions and it helps some people in some ways. So by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know, NZ Navigator is an online self-assessment that's been built for community organisations. So they rate themselves across 9 areas of operation or domains, and they include things like governance, finance, evaluation, administration, communication, all of that good stuff. So that's NZ Navigator self-assessment. CommunityNet Aotearoa is an online bank of free resources, again specifically for community organisations. So a group finishes its assessment, gets its assessment report, and that links to resources on CommunityNet Aotearoa. So the group sets its own priorities, creates an action plan, and gets on with the work in its own way. So we haven't just built that for registered charities, so there's, at some counts, 114,000 community organisations across New Zealand. We can't all be in all of those places. We have to empower and entrust people to get on with it themselves. Both of those tools, NZ Navigator and CommunityNet Aotearoa, are owned by the NZ Navigator Trust, but today I really want to acknowledge Dave Henderson in his role as coordinator of Angoa. He was at the table in the early days, and also DIA Charity Services were there too. So we launched NZ Navigator in 2013, and today we've got more than 2,000 registered users. And then on CommunityNet Aotearoa, that's a busy site. We have around 2,700 visits in any month. So we've been collecting aggregate data from those self-assessments, and we also use Google Analytics to have a look at people's behaviour when they visit those sites. For a long time at NZ Navigator, we felt like we were a bit of a voice in the wilderness. But lately we've been hearing many conversations and debates about governance in the community sector. It kind of feels like the topic of the day. And frankly, there's a lot of noise. So at NZ Navigator, we've decided that it's time to put a stake in the ground. We believe good governance is appropriate governance. So we believe in the power of kitchen table governance to keep community organisations doing their awesome. We know that busy people need simple, relevant tools and resources to support them to do their work, and democracy and self-determination are at the heart of the work that we do to support the sector. And we have data to support our state. So, to improve governance across the charitable sector in Aotearoa, we believe two things are essential. One is to understand that we're working for behaviour change and attitude change, so we need to use some social science while we do this work. And two, most important to us, meet people where they are at and start with what they care about. So what does the data tell us? People are often motivated to get busy at the start of the year. So March is the busiest assessment in NZ Navigator land. So about 30% of assessments are completed between February and April, and then the rest are evenly spread throughout the year. Social services, culture, sport and rec, health and religious organisations are actively using NZ Navigator. Environment, education, development and housing, much less so. Based on the overall average over the past year, the highest rated domains have been relationships, you might laugh at the next one, finances and direction, which is the language that we use around your strategy. The lowest rated domains are evaluation, communication and administration. And to clarify, communication is about telling your story and engaging with your stakeholders, not so much around relationships. So from the data, there's a couple of interesting insights that I wanted to share with you. One is around uptake. So for the most part, uptake follows population, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. But there are three regions that are outstanding in the field with really high uptake. So Waikato, Bay of Plenty and Taranaki. And what we know is that in those regions there are long established, really highly regarded, community-based capability builders active. So it shows that there's a link between having trusted support on the ground and getting on with self-assessment. In terms of development stage, we ask people to indicate if they're new, emerging, growing or developed. New and growing organisations are the ones that are most engaged in self-assessment, and that makes sense. You're at the start, you want to find some things out, you're growing, you want to pause and see what do we take with us going forward, what do we leave behind. Developed organisations that have been around for longer than 10 years know that you have to stop and pause and reflect. Interestingly, the ones who really don't bother are emerging organisations. So that's in their first 2, 3, 4 years. And interestingly, at this time, it's exactly in that period of their development that they're forming their patterns and habits, including what they do about governance. And it correlates with the use of CommunityNet Aotearoa. So the 5 most visited resources over the last year are all to do with setting up a new organisation, including legal structures, trustees and that sort of thing. So to finish, I've got some advice for those who are working to improve governance in Aotearoa. Speak to 2-year-old organisations in the South Island in the first half of the year. And also, present governance and what it is and why it matters at the initial inquiry and registration phase and stage. Follow up in year 2. Look at your register in year 2. Talk to people and get them reflecting. Give them some indicators about where they should be up to in their governance development. And thirdly, develop really practical tools, that's for all of us, that supports people's behaviour. There's lots more to discuss. The screen's turned red. There is one other element, because I've got the speaker and so I'm going to. And I'm really interested that we carry on a conversation and discussion here in New Zealand to look at cultural paradigms that exist here and look for great models of governance that are not typical Western European ways of looking at things. So go to Pacific communities, Māori communities, and understand how are decisions made, how are assets managed, how are disputes resolved, how do organisations and communities stay on track? Because believe me, there are solutions sitting in there to all of that stuff. And if we meld and merge and learn from one another, we can have something that's really pretty awesome, but also actually works here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So, kia ora.
Thank you for that, Sarah. That's very good. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about this research. And now, Tina Wilson.
That we walked for like on Red Parade, so kia ora everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa ki Mikaona kia koutou taia tēnā mai tēnei wā. Pia tūtai kami ki te mana whenua tēnei whare te atiawa, te whānau o te whakatungarewa, tēnā koutou kia koe te tuihine, e te tuikana, nei rā te mihi, kia koutou katoa te pai matui no tātou katoa, kia koutou i mo kei konei, nei rā te mihi ko tēnā ui pei ana Wilson tēnei, no tānui waka, tarurua ngā pai maunga, ko te awa o ohau nui ana naia, taku awa ko Ngāti Tupoi e te iwi. So, get on that. Might be a nice lifting off where Karen left it when we did a bit of hand raising, because this is going to be the best 7 minutes of your life. And that's my objective, is to get you all excited for our next speaker on the panel. So who in here, so we know who's governors and who's on charitable trust and who's on commercial. So who here is from a professional firm, be it a lawyer or an accountant? Okay, so there's a good kind of third of the room that sits in there. Okay, I'm going to go drill a little bit deeper. Who here is associated with Māori Charitable Trust? Okay, well, that's more than I expected. Cool, go loud, get your hand up there and be proud about that stuff. So what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about then, and also lifting off my fellow panellists that are here, was around the differences and the nuances of cultural governance structures. And I'm going to speak about my specialty, which is Māori business. To put that in context, I started my governance journey as a wee peepee, wee baby in the arms of my mothers or my nannies at the marae as they debated furiously over what fundraiser that they were going to establish at the marae committee. And often it would be a euchre night or a casino night. They were really the rage back then. So that was the first kind of inference into what it meant to be part of a wider structure and social community. But all of these are purpose-driven. Now you guys are the converted, you understand that. It's all about purpose, it's all about values, it's all about what's important to people. The next layer of my governance career journey was when I became the first student rep at St. Joseph's Māori Girls College. That was a big deal back then. They gave me $20 into my tuck shop account, and that kind of set me out for life. So that was quite impressive and important. But what I did see then was the complexity of even things like schools and how onerous the task is around governance. I was injected into governance as a young Māori woman, from a financial investment background. So I ticked a few boxes. So at the age of 30, I received my first Crown appointment. I'm sure Karen was equally box ticking along the way. But that didn't mean that you just got there and you rested on your laurels. You had to bring something to the table. And I think the best governance that the governance learnings I've had has been surrounded by great governors and learning from them and watching from them. So you need that knowledge and that strength at those governance tables, no matter what business or structure they are. And it's equally harder when they're charities, because you come from quite a different cloth and what your purpose, your motivation and your drivers are. So I kind of sat on Careers New Zealand, I sat on Lotteries Grants Board. You know, that was quite an awakener. And I sat on the national board, but then we had to sit on all of these subsidiary committees across the country. And every region, every place, every sector, every grouping of people, they're all different. And that's probably the biggest point. It's not to assume that people's motivations are always going to be the same. And a good example of that is people might say, well, Māori Pacifica, we get blended together a lot. And we are. We're cousins, we're whānau, we've got whakapapa and history together. But our drivers are different. And so when it comes to governance and the way that we think, they might be structurally different as well. And so that's probably a bit of a learning to actually really understand those motivations around these charitable organisations. Oh, I have time, don't I? I could talk all day over here about myself. I then went on to be my sister and I set up the first Māori Chartered Accountancy practice, so I got to see quite deep and dirty across where the level of charitable organisations were for Māoridom across the country. And that was right at the forefront when Kōngariro Trust was established for the Kōngariro.
So we understood what it meant to receive boxes of shoe boxes full of receipts and how we were to support them. Now these are community people meant to be doing good things for their community, their people, their babies for tomorrow. So they were struggling with a lot of those notions. So education
of governors is always going to be the thing. Now governors will come at us from many, many different circles, so many, many different channels. But ultimately, they've got to be passionate, they've got to be motivated, and the aptitude and attitude that was spoken about before, they are the critical factors for great governance. Because if you're not motivated about it, you'll just be compliance. Compliance and governance should not really, whilst a governor has to be compliant, it shouldn't be motivation. You have to be thinking wider than that. So that's the challenge around creating that wave of change. So that spectrum of portfolio people is really, really important. Then I went on to become the first Māori work in the first Māori investment firm. So this is where it gets nitty-gritty. So we were working across entities who were all pretty much charitable in nature. They were trusts and corporations. They were, if you come back, that structure was onus and put upon them back in order to see their treaty rights. So they couldn't be a voter way back when if they didn't have a structure surrounding it. So there was some complexities around how Māoridom was introduced into structures of governance and trust and legislation. So that comes with a little bit of resistance. And then by seeing that, we realised that a lot of governance, people are selected for their governance roles purely by popularity. And so this will be similar in the communities that you might be across as well. So they don't necessarily come with the right skill set, but they will have other characteristics that people see valuable in representing them. And so in Māori spaces, quadruple bottom lining, that's a term we can loosely chuck around, but it's the things that the world is actually waking itself up to: environmental, social and governance, so the ESG factors that the United Nations think about. And then you've got to put a cultural lens on that. You've got to put time frames on that. People think about their decisions differently. For Māori people and for Pacifica people and probably other ethnicities, our family businesses don't think about next generation. We think in waves of 7. The waves come in 7. And so an average generation is about 25 years. So we're thinking that's what we think in a generation shift. So it's apples with apples and making sure that the decisions I make today as a governor are going to affect my grandchildren's mukapuna. And so that's actually quite an onerous task for governors in these structures. I've got the red timer and I didn't even get to what I was talking about, so it means I've got some heaps of cool things that we can share as the panel goes across it. But governance for Māori entities is like an onion. When you cook it right, it's sweet and it just sings and it's beautiful. But when you get it wrong, it can really, really make you cry. And the other things about that is when you're dealing with family businesses, which is a lot of these trusts and corporations are ultimately family businesses, your responsibility, your accountability is really, really high. And they know where you live, so you're never going to get an escape. So we'll just leave it with that. There's lots to talk about in the nuances and differences around Māori trusts and corporations and the charitable nature of them, but maybe that'll come out in some of the questions. Kia ora.
Thank you, Tina. Now I've got Rosemary to give it an Australian perspective, so treat it nicely.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. So someone can have slides and that's me. I will tell you there is a mistake on the slides. First person to find it gets a Freddo frog. I won't tell you if it was deliberate or negligent, but there we go. So Sue's asked me just to give a broad overview of how the governance standards are working in Australia. So this is going to be fairly superficial because there's I could speak for hours. Maybe I will. Andrew said he would tase me, but I pointed out you can't because I'm on the next panel as well. So how are the governance standards working in Australia, partly because it's something being considered standard in New Zealand. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you would know we've had a review of the ACNC Act in Australia with lots of very considered submissions. But I just want to point out the broader context is there's been a spotlight on governance in Australia in particular. So we've had the Banking Royal Commission, and that recommended that our corporate litigated asset get tougher. We've had the Edelman Barometer saying there's a global implosion in trust in institutions. We've had our securities regulator release corporate governance principles that were quite controversial, well actually weren't as controversial as they could have been. And as I said, we've had the review of the ACNC. So just an overview of how charities or what our constitutional system is. Now, I'm not a constitutional expert, but it's quite important to understand it because it explains some of the anomalies we have in our system, which you don't need to have in New Zealand. So, firstly though, charities, or the regulatory framework is the Australian Charities Not-for-Profits Commission Act and the ACNC regulations. The constitutional aspects are because we have federal and state and territory governments tasked with different powers. Now it's a little bit more complex than that, but our federal government doesn't have power to regulate every aspect of, to make laws for every aspect of governance and regulation. So for example, in the corporations area, we didn't have a uniform scheme for years and years because we had state and territories having different schemes. And the way we've achieved our corporation scheme is for the states and territories to refer their power to the Commonwealth. But that has a sunset clause, so every 5 years that has to be renewed. Now we don't have that with charities regulation. So those are the key points of key acts that I'll be talking about today. There are, of course, a number of other layers of regulation, and that's an issue as we heard from Sari. So when we look at the governance standards, there are 5 broad governance standards. I won't go into them in detail. The first is that registered entities, so registered charities, have to be not-for-profit and work towards their charitable purpose. The second is that charities need to take reasonable steps to be accountable to their members. The third is that charities mustn't commit a serious offence. The fourth is that charities must take reasonable steps to ensure that their board members aren't disqualified either from acting as a director in the corporate sphere or disqualified by the ACNC. This is a summary. The fifth is the one that I've focused on so far, although I haven't actually officially started my research yet. So the fifth is the duties of what are called responsible entities. Now responsible entities means responsible persons, which means trustees, directors, that sort of thing. Before I look at Governance Standard 5, what you'll notice is that the obligations are all imposed on the entity. The obligations aren't imposed on individual responsible persons, and that's because of the constitutional framework. So Governance Standard 5, which I won't read through, basically says that a registered entity, so a charity, has to take reasonable steps to ensure that basically the directors and trustees comply with a whole lot of duties. Now I don't want to be tasing, so I won't read them all, but basically to exercise their powers with due care and diligence, to act in good faith in the interest of the entity, not to misuse their position to declare conflicts, not to engage in insolvent trading, that sort of thing. I think the slides can be made available, so they're there. So Governance Standard 5 is what I've focused on. Recently, as I said, a detailed review was undertaken into how the legislation was operating, and I should just say that our ACNC has only been operating for 5 years. It was a bit contested at the start, so it's actually quite early to assess how it's all going. And also the ACNC's key focus has been guidance and education. What did the ACNC review say about Governance Standard 5, or the system of governance, is that it's complex and confusing. It's unreasonable to expect volunteer directors working in the sector to understand and comply with multiple jurisdictional and inconsistent governance requirements. So that's a pretty firm tick of approval to our model of governance standards. What are the issues briefly? Firstly, one of the key problems is that the duties are imposed on the entity. it's for a charity to take reasonable steps to make sure the individuals comply. Now, what I find in practice is that there's the stance taken by academics is different to the stance taken by practitioners. So I've tried to talk to as many people as I can about this. When you look at it on paper, there are a lot of inconsistencies. When you talk to practitioners in practice, they say, well, it's actually working quite well. The governance standards are actually just the minimum standard and people are really wanting good governance. So there are some problems with the model in that I think that it does leave a gap in terms of individual accountability. Individuals aren't accountable under these governance standards. Also, our duties in the Corporations Act for directors of charitable companies have a lot of them being turned off, although there's debate about that. Can that be fixed? I think that could be quite easily fixed. I don't think it's as big a problem as it first appeared, but we need to do some finessing just to work out the interaction between these governance standards and the Corporations Act. The third is the interaction between these governance standards and requirements for incorporated and unincorporated associations. The main thing that I see is that there isn't a regulator who can take action in certain cases where there's misappropriation of charitable assets. So whether that happens or not is something to look into. When there's something serious like crime, criminal breach or fraud, then action can be taken. But there seems to be a gap because our corporate regulator doesn't have jurisdiction. As I said, anecdotal evidence is that it's actually working quite well. Finally, and I've run out of time, I don't think the governance standards per se are problematic. So I don't think there's any reason why New Zealand should bring in governance standards. The problem I see in Australia is the constitutional aspect, that the governance standards are imposed on the entity, not the individuals. But it seems to me there's no reason why in New Zealand, if you brought in uniform standards, they couldn't be imposed on the individuals as well. Having said that, I think I agree with what Sue was saying. It takes time. You need to look at the interaction between these governance standards and all the other requirements to sort it out. Because one of the things that people are giving me feedback on is it's so complex. And you don't want the governance standards to be another layer of complexity. Sarah was talking to us about that this morning. Final thing, here's a hint if you're looking for a photo frog. Our Institute of Company Directors released not-for-profit principles, and I think they're excellent. I think that they could. No one put there. All right. I think they're excellent. I think there could be a little bit more focus on a little bit more detail on social and environmental risks, but I do recommend them in terms of looking at governance models. Sorry.